Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer and welcome to the breaking news. Today we've heard that President Emmanuel Macron of France has demanded that French troops be sent into Ukraine along with the rest of the NATO forces. This has come after many movements by the Russian forces, although incredibly slow and culminating over a campaign of nearly 6 months, were finally able to take the Ukrainian city of Avdiivka, and also at the exact same time that President Volodymyr Zelensky said that out of the 1 million shells that the European Union promised to send Ukraine, Ukraine has only received a third of that, at around 330,000. The French president has been outraged about this public announcement that a very small amount of European support was able to make it through, and he said that the goal set by the Europeans was entirely unrealistic due to how artillery supply chains and ammunition supply chains work. In response to this, France has said that he does want to send troops to Ukraine without any kind of possible delay. And this is something that has been causing massive upsets, not only in the Western world, as this is in contradiction to some larger nations' requests and hopes for how the war will turn out, but it also is showing that there is a massive amount of attention with the Russian Federation about this specific instance. However, France is not alone on the insistence of sending troops into Ukraine, as the Polish President Andrzej Duda also said something very similar, and said that the most heated discussion that happened in Paris revolved around the issue of sending troops to Ukraine. And here, too, there was absolutely no agreement. And he said that there was no enthusiasm for the idea either when he brought it up at the time. But now, much later on, maybe several weeks later, we're starting to see that Emmanuel Macron, president of France, is certainly starting to show that this kind of an idea is gaining a massive amount of momentum, at least within the European countries that are a part of NATO. At the exact same time within Belgium, we've also heard that the NATO General Secretary has made a statement contradicting France and Poland and has said that NATO allies are providing unprecedented amounts of support for Ukraine, but there will be no combat troops representative of any NATO countries that will be on the ground in Ukraine. Somewhat showing that there is a massive disconnect in between the NATO's primary wishes or NATO's strategic interests and the individual NATO member states like France and Poland who do want to see armed forces inside of Ukraine and fighting alongside the Ukrainian armed forces. At the exact same time, Putin has threatened war over this very particular instance, and he has said that these kinds of actions will come with severe reprisals. And we can see that the Russian armed forces are actually beginning to restructure back into a Cold War kind of a command theater, or more so command centers, as we see that the Western Command District today has gone through a major restructuring. And because of this, really the entire combat structure of the Russian armed forces will be going through a massive military restructuring. According to the information that we got today, Vladimir Putin has signed 2 decrees just a few hours ago reestablishing the Leningrad military district and the Moscow military district. In prior times, after the fall of the Soviet Union and the creation of the Russian Federation and all of the other former Soviet republics, the Russian Federation had these 2 military districts as holdovers from the Cold War. During that time, the Soviet Union wished to try and create more effective and more micromanaged military districts, and so they had 2 separate military districts, the Leningrad military district and the Moscow military district. As the Russian Federation began to run into massive economic issues during the late 1990s and early 2000s, the decision was made that the Leningrad and Moscow military district would need to be axed and instead be replaced with a singular Western military district. While allowing for less combat flexibility, it did provide an easier command structure and an easier amount of maintenance, although once again, decreasing the efficiency and combat efficacy of units that fell under such a large military district, considering that these 2 military districts in particular house something around 60% of the Russian Federation's entire population. However, the decision has been made once again, just today, to split the Western military district into 2 completely separate ones. And this may be suggesting that the Russian Federation is starting to look at a possible war with the West, and they're beginning to structure their armed forces once more off of that older Soviet pattern where they were expecting a large land war in Europe. Going off of this, it is certainly showing that the situation is becoming incredibly strenuous. And at the very same time, we're also starting to see that the Russian Federation is beginning to protect their domestic supply of gas and oils that are being produced inside of Russia, and are now banning the gas exports from traveling abroad. According to what we found, they are going to be banning gas exports for the next 6 months, starting on March 1st in just a few days. Apparently, from what we're understanding, the Ukrainian attacks on the oil refineries and also oil silos throughout the Russian Federation has reaped such massive and severe damage that currently the Russian oil and gas supply lines will not be able to survive unless if most gas exports are completely stopped. This will not be affecting the countries of Mongolia, Uzbekistan, and Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which are two unrecognized countries within the territory of the nation of Georgia. But it will be affecting most nations that were getting imports of Russian gas. And this is once again starting to show that once again, the Russians are preparing for war. And not only that, the Ukrainian attacks that have been conducted onto Russian infrastructure, such as their refineries and silos, are causing serious enough damage that they're now having to limit the amount of gasoline that is exported abroad, or else otherwise start running into a lack of gasoline and a massive thirst in Russia for a fuel which is not produced in enough readily available amounts. But outside of that, we are seeing that while the Russian Federation is still continuing on with what appears to be posturing for a preparation with a war with Europe, and also at the same time showing that the Ukrainian attacks are starting to severely damage their infrastructure, we are also starting to hear that the Ukrainian armed forces are still wreaking massive and unprecedented amounts of damage onto the Russian Air Force. Previously, we have seen that over the past week and a half, Russian Su-34s as well as Su-35s have been taking massive amounts, incredibly high amounts of losses compared to the rest of the war, as these aircraft are now trying to use a brand new kind of a weapon, the Fab 500 glide bomb, which requires these Su-34s to climb up to a higher altitude, around 6,000 to 7,000 feet up. This makes them a massive target on radar and usually leads to them having highly increased losses. At the same time, however, we are also seeing that two more Su-34s were shot down today, probably for the exact same reasons. One was shot down at 1000 hours, or 1000 hours in the morning, and one was shot down at 1400 hours later on, around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. These losses are massive for the Russian military. Aircraft like these are not easily replaceable, especially considering that Western sanctions are cutting down on the Russians' ability to get computer components easily, and on top of that, these airframes are no longer in production inside of the Russian Federation. These losses are irreplaceable, and we're starting to see that the use of these Fab 500 glide bombs, although rarely being successful, are leading to unbelievable losses for the Russian aviation. So far over the past week and a half, we are assuming that the Russian Air Force has lost nearly half the size of the Ukrainian Air Force in losses. Once again, showing that these kinds of strategies are not going to be working long term, and that the Russians are going to be losing a lot of irreplaceable and highly expensive aircraft and also pilots in the conducting of these air operations. We are going to be assuming that at some point the Russians will most likely cease to attempt the use of glide bombs due to the heavy casualty rates that are involved in trying to attempt these kinds of air raids, but at this moment it does not appear that they're going to be stopping. These air raids are not the only ones as well, as we do know that the Russian Air Force is continuing to operate their normal indirect fire missions, such as taking S-8 rocket pods and then just firing them off into the distance, but nevertheless, they are still showing that their attempts at trying to use their air power against the Ukrainians are not going well. They never were able to secure the airspace entirely around the nation of Ukraine. The airspace is still heavily contested, and it's certainly starting to show as the Russian Air Force continues to take such high losses as the ones we saw just over the past 24 hours. But with that, that is most of the major news that we have today. I thank you all so much once again for watching this. If y'all did enjoy, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe on this channel, and also support us on Patreon. That link you can find right below this video in the description. And also make sure to keep apprised of what's going on in this war, because things are starting to get very heated very quickly. With what's going on here in Western Europe, particularly with Poland and France, and also what seems to be a small spat that they're having with the NATO General Secretary, it looks like things certainly are starting to heat up, and it looks like we're on a very certain but not completely locked in path to war with the Russian Federation, based off of all the statements that have been made by officials in the past saying that the public of these nations should prepare for war, and now with the statements of the French and Polish presidents saying that they need to start preparing to send troops into Ukraine. It may be an inevitable head that is reached in between the Western world and the Russian Federation that leads to an all-out war at this point, but hopefully that is not the case. Nevertheless, please make sure to subscribe, because if that ever does happen, we will be telling you all about that news right here on this channel. And with that, I will see you all in the next one.